So I'm starting with the glyphs of the day. This is the sign Na. That's the common form of Na. It does have a main variant that looks like either happy or unhappy face. It depends. And then there is a rare variety that you don't have to remember now, but it looks like a generally female head. But I mentioned to you, there's almost no gendering in my representations of people. This is actually a maize god, a male maize god. And the only visible difference between this hat and the hat of a beautiful female is the jewel. And usually the scroll is somewhat different. Female hats would have a lock of hair. And this fella seems to have something like a piece of plant, the scroll. But the bead is the only significant difference. And then these two signs are relatively common. We'll see more of them with the verbs. We've seen already some examples of bu. And the interesting part is, at first there's only one sign, and it seems to be used to record both sounds, mu and bu. And then later on, they create a second sign that has dots and is otherwise identical, very much like English C and G. And that is part of the argument some scholars made about possible foreign connections of my writing system, that it was originally borrowed from a language that didn't have B sounds, like a Mihisokian language of the Olmec civilization. That's like a very structural argument. Now, this is actually something that is very solvent. Even pictorial art is not necessarily transparent or self-apparent. And the point is, if I'm an average Maya person, does it always look to me like that? Or does it take some training to realize that that's, cotton? But that's the problem of when we say, well, writing aren't necessarily transparent. Well, every writing, every art, every visual system develops its own conventions, and then people learn to see things in a certain way. The very same way we learn to see things in a certain way through our visual culture, recognize things. And then there's a syllable chi, which I just included because I like it. It refers probably to speech, because teach is speech. So like, I'm saying something here. So it just shows hands, a hand like this. So we're talking about place names today, and you may remember from the lecture about the decipherment of my writing that Henry Berlin was the first person who realized that some titles had spatial distribution. He called them Emblem Glyphs, and he hypothesized that those could be somehow connected to places. Now, we know, of course, that those are royal titles, which incorporate place names inside. It wasn't until early 90s that Dave Stewart and Steve Houston realized that you could actually identify places based on this verb that we already know. It happened at, or as it happened, since it happened. That verb would be followed by some of the combinations of characters scholars saw in the emblem glyphs. And then it would sometimes be followed by additional words, which Steve Houston and Dave Stewart hypothesized could be landscape categories, like the city so-and-so, the land so-and-so. And so that was the start of the study of place names proper, right? Identifying actual locations mentioned in the text, sometimes overlapping with those in the so-called emblem glyphs, sometimes not so much. So there was a monograph that came out in the early 90s, Classic Maya Place Names, and that's, of course, the topic that I also studied, and one of my favorites. This is an example of a statement about place. This one curiously mentions gods, and we'll talk more about time, but as time goes by, it fails, it gets weaker, it diminishes, and apparently everything does. So every 20 years, you need to renew the world. So this is a reference to a midpoint in the 20-year cycle. So it's half diminishing, tan lamao. And tan lamach is half diminished. Half diminished 8,000 terrestrial and celestial gods. It happened at Uhti, and then, I'm sorry for the cut, the screen, Kuk, La, Chan, Kab, En. Kukla means kukul, place of many squirrels. Apparently, the core of the ancient city of Tikal, that's how it was actually called. Place of many squirrels, place where squirrels abound. Uh, and, uh, and then the text continues saying, in the sky, in the land, in the caves. So obviously the event is happening at Tikal in the place of many scrolls, but it's a cosmic event. It's something that affects the universe at large. So it happens everywhere, in every bit of the universe, in the skies, in the caves, in the land. There are different kinds of place names in Maya texts. There are basic terms which just name something, like a salient feature of a place, such as big rocks. We have a lot of places like that in English too. Then you can have place names formed with a place name suffix. Long vowel L, most likely il or ul in most cases. That means a place where something is common, a place where something abounds. So Yashnil, for example, here is the place of many lovely Katingas. Then you have the suffix nao that literally means corn. But in the colonial dictionaries, in all of the known references, the general meaning of the suffix with place names is just the place. So, for example, in early colonial narratives, Ahotochnal means people who live in houses. Otoch is house in Yucatec, now place. So Ahotochnal, Persian of a town, of a city. Of course, on the opposite end would be Ashob, or Ashob, people who live in the forest, those who don't pay taxes and practice idolatry, right? Those who refuse to live in these forced resettlement communities that the Spaniards constructed for them. So in that context, Nal is no longer directly referencing cornfields, but it's interesting that this notion of place is very closely linked to corn. Like human places is where you can grow corn, where you can have milpa and a cornfield. You can also use locatives, tahan, in the middle of something. This place is called in the middle of a hearth, probably because it's very hot. It is very hot in that place. And then taus, where at, in, us means mosquito, so you can kind of understand what kind of place it is. T at the edge, and this is tipa, edge of a ravine. So locatives, tan, ta, ti. In Chorti, for example, it's still relatively common to have place names like ti or ta, and then ti. So tuti kopote, ta u ti kopot, at the edge of the forest, literally in its edge forest. Lacantun, big rocks. That's the nation name of the river we know today as Usumacinta. And this is my photo from 2007. Big rocks. This river has very strong currents, massive rocks, very dangerous rapids, and the level can change by as much as 10 feet overnight. It's a very dangerous river. And when you're canoeing down that river, you're really thinking, big rocks. Oh my, I'm gonna die. And there are some places where you actually have to carry your canoes because you cannot cross them and survive. So big rocks, very, very accurate. And of course, modern Lacandon self-designation of the descendants of Maya refugees from northern Yucatan who settled that landscape basically comes from the river. And one of the tributaries of those Macinta rivers is still called Lacantun. Yashnil, place of many lovely Katingas. That's what a lovely Katinga looks like. It's a beautiful bird. And in fact, the full name of that city, today known as the archaeological site of El Cayo, is Yash Akul Ha Yashnil. Green blue, precious water, place of many turtles. The place of many lovely Katingas. You kind of have a nice picture, picturesque city next to the river. Probably a great place to be. This is Anwits now. So the milpa and the yellowish hill, right? The milpa of the yellowish hill. this is what the landscape actually looks like in that part of southern Palenque. It's relatively flat, but you have these very steep hills. They're not tall, they're like 100 meters, 150 meters at the most, right? Like 300-400 feet, but they're incredibly steep. So this is the landscape a little bit south of the ancient city of Huitznal, but it's one of those hills. So it's very descriptive. And it's kind of easy to imagine little milpas here. Of course, today it's all cattle ranching, as you can see in this photo. But if you had like little cornfields and gardens by one of these hills, that'll be on Huitznal. That's an old photo, but you get a sense of like the usual temperature at this time of the year over there. It's totally in the middle of a hearth. It's very hot. Southern Palenque, super hot. So very accurate description. Now, this is part of the ancient Maya city of Palenque. You can have a house by a waterfall. There are beautiful streams, but apparently there's a catch. Like lots of waterfalls means there's a lot of standing water. This is the Western Maya approach, like Western Cholan approach to this type of place names. In the swamps around the site of Homul where I work, there's a place name called Usul. That means exactly the same thing, a place where mosquitoes abound. Usul or Usil. And this is Taos, a place of where mosquitoes are, basically. I'm surprised there are not more place names like that. And then Tipa, edge of the ravine, that's probably this ravine, although I'm not 100% sure, near the site of Naranjo. It's an important ravine because there's actually a stream flowing through that. And that's still the main source of water, perennial source of water for archaeologists and for the nearby ranchers, the Burgos family. And believe it or not, sometimes there are like fights over water source. In 2006, one of the workers for the archaeological project didn't check the pipes for a week because he didn't know how, but because of his masculinity, he didn't know how to tell everyone. And so the pipes went unchecked, and then the water stopped, and then the Burgos family thought that archaeologists used up all the water, and then the archaeologists thought that the Burgos family used up all the water, so we had a water standoff. And then fortunately, one of the guys checked the pipes, and then we kind of interrogated the person in charge, and it turned out that he knew nothing, and he just didn't know how to tell. And then we had to dig up all the pipes and fix it because there were like water bubbles in the pipes from like lack of maintenance. But fortunately, we didn't have to kill each other over water, so it's good ending overall. It's interesting when you think about how frequent certain place names are, like components of place. It tells you a little bit about what Mayas thought was important, and it's a lot of hills and a lot of water. And it's interesting when we look at landscape with modern research tools such as LiDAR. We see the areas of varied topography are the most heavily populated. Because in this kind of landscape, it's all about channeling water. It's not enough to have flat landscape and water. It means it's very hard to manage because it's hard to channel water when you need it, and it's hard to get rid of it when you don't. But if you have mountains or hills and some bajos, lower areas, then you can create canals, dams, reservoirs, and you can control water. You can live on high elevations. You're not afraid of flooding. You can channel all the excess water into reservoirs during the rainy season, and you can use it during the dry season. So areas with wheats and with different kinds of water bodies, they have population densities on an order of magnitude greater than just flat areas. And that's basic scientific data from LiDAR and from settlement surveys. So there seems to be a relationship here between the way Maya perceived this potential infinite amount of features in the landscape, and they say, okay, this is a mountain, this is a body of water, right? It's about salience, what really matters. And then, of course, you have trees, sky, or perhaps a lot of high places, and then same mountains, and then earth. Very few actual caves, and you can see a lot of houses. A lot of place names are about houses, different kinds of houses, because they're all settlements. So these are just some examples. Baka Mountain, more wheats. Petun, the Pe rock, we don't know what Pe is. Sakha, white water, or whitish water. Saknikte, white plumeria tree. Saktsi, white dog. Pachan, split sky, or perhaps high ravines, something along those lines. And then Hotab, 5 lands or 5 towns. Ikalna, mud houses. Perhaps not very elevating place name. But the site is actually an island in the middle of a swamp. So it's very accurate. And then Tanchen, before the cave, or in front of the cave, or next to a cave. So these are descriptive place names. Now, how do Maya talk about landscape in terms of landscape categories? There are 3 landscape categories: land, kab, chen, cave, and chan, sky. And sometimes they're in pairs, usually chan chen, sky cave, and kab chen, land cave. So these terms, as Stewart and Houston argued early on, are Maya categories of place. And chen can literally refer to caves. We know it because we have inscriptions in the caves. So in this text, somebody is arriving in his cave, to chen. And in this case, somebody is completing a period ending, so to speak, in the cave. And those are cave inscriptions. But caves are a little more than that. In the Maya imagination, these are places that connect to the other side, to the world of the ancestors. This image shows you a mountain with bones and skulls and an ancestor emerging from the mouth. I've shown you that picture before. And cave glyphs, they show bones, occasionally darkness, sun inside darkness, so eye inside darkness, so sensory deprivation, owls, which are cave dwellers. And so caves seem to be holy grounds in general in many modern Mayan languages, and covers pretty much anything that has an opening and water coming out of it. So it can be a karstic well, it can be a collapsed karstic well, it can be a rock outcrop, it can be a spring coming from the ground, a rock shelter, an actual cave. But you kind of see the pattern there, like the place where the bones of the earth are visible is chen, kind of an intersection between the 2 worlds. So chen functions really as a term for cities. So Maya think of cities as places where this kind of interaction between the dead and the living, between the gods and the living is possible. So that's what chen is. So here somebody arrives in Ushvitsa, that's the name of Karakol, the lake of 3 mountains, so 3 hills. So somebody arrives in the chen of Ushvitsa. In this case, Saal, the ancient name of the city of Naranjo, is falling and is defeated, and it's the chen of its king, whose name is Kushach. And in the 3rd example, somebody is buried, Murkach, in his chen in Yashnil, in the place of lovely Katingas. Well, people still die in the place of lovely Katingas from time to time, they're buried there. One of my best cases in terms of trying to understand what chen is comes from their archaeological site of Palenque. So this is the downtown Palenque. This is the main palace. And we'll talk more about urban landscape later on. The white skin house. It's literally painted white with flowers. So it's a white skin house. And these are some of the main temples. There's actually 2 triads of temples. And they basically ascend to a place where the river comes from the ground and becomes Dotulum Spring, and the river that gives its name to the site, Big Water, Lakamha. But somewhere around that area is also a mountain, a hill, and there's a hilltop shrine. Unfortunately, archaeologists never found it yet, but looters did, so we have panels from that shrine in various private collections. When and how it was looted, we don't know. Probably sometime in the early 20th century. So the place is known as Lakamha. Somewhere around it is Yemalkuk Lakamwitz, the great hill of the descending Quetzal. Kind of nice name. When Palenque kings needed to renew their gods, so Palenque kings were non-local. They came from a distant place called Matuil, then they went to a place called Baakal, then they went to a place called Toktan, and then they settled at Lakamha. Their gods were from Matuil, from 3,000 years ago, allegedly. So when they needed to recharge their gods, literally, you create new idols, then you need to summon the gods back into the idols. They had to pay a visit to the local god, the god of that land, whose name was Ushbolonchak, 3 times 9 chaks, or 3 times many chaks, some kind of rain deity. And when the king of Palenque, Kinichkan Balam, decided to rebuild the temples, he also needed to renew the idols. So every dedicatory text in the new temples also mentions how he did the renewal of the idols. So we have 3 references to his visit to that mountaintop shrine, and each reference is slightly different, but it describes the same event. And so in one case, he says, Holy Matwil Lord, Kinichkan Balam, ascends to the resplendent Quetzal house, Kinich Kukna. That presumably is the name of the temple, right? To the dwelling, and then with 2 priests, he does it. It happens at Lakamha, in the sky, in the Chen. It is the Chen of Chak Hushbolonchak. So we know it's a house, and it's the Chen of that god. And it's in Lakamha, in the sky, and in the Chen. The second reference goes, Holy Matwil Lord Kinishkan Balam ascends to the resplendent Quetzal house. When he ascends, and that implies he goes up, right? It's on the mountain somewhere. To the dwelling to his dwelling, the priest. And he calls himself the Bakel sorcerer in this case, one of their titles. Apparently they had some special knowledge related to sorcery. He conjures gods 3 times, and that is the same in the first sentence too. It happens at Lakamha, in the sky, in the cave, upon the great mountain of the descending Quetzal. So we know that resplendent Quetzal house is somewhere on a mountain where you have to ascend to. That's the Chen of the god, and that's the Chen of the place of Lakamha. And this is the panel looted from that shrine, now in the collection at the Bark Noaks. This is the younger brother of the king, who had to wait while Kinishkan Balam reigned, and then eventually Kinishkan Balam died. And there was a little bit of a problem, like if you're a younger brother, obviously the older brother was in charge of most of things when he was, heir apparent to the throne. So you have to kind of build a narrative about how important, in fact, you were. This fellow emphasized his contribution to that mountaintop temple. Apparently, he was in charge. He was a head priest of that shrine, allegedly. And so there he is, dressed as that 3 times 9 chak. You see he's wearing the crown of the rain god, a little jar with water, and a serpent shown as lightning. And he's carrying a lightning axe. And there's his mom and his dad, very happy, proud. This boy's a keeper, they probably say. The dad is holding the living spirit of royal crowns, and the mom is holding Kawil, the energy, the essence of royalty. And they're like, it's all yours. Just, wait a little bit for your older brother to die eventually. So the text says, Och otot na, he house entered into the Waibil. The first time they use this term in reference to this mountain, it's Waibil, literally the dormitory, like the residence of Hushbolonchak. And then the text goes on, Tehach tu Vitziluk hul. The foot is stepped upon the mountain of his god. And of course, his foot may refer to the god or to the king or to both, because the king is dressed as the god. They're Ubahilean, their essence is emerged. And then the text continues referring to the same event. Och Kawil enters, Ochik Kawil, Tatits, into the mountain outcrop, rock outcrop, which is Ushbolonchak. So we know that Ushbolonchak is a rock. So somewhere on that mountain, there is a holy rock, very much like the Indian Wakas. And in that rock, there is a spirit that people come to talk to and ask for rain. And that's the real owner of this land. And even kings of Palenque have to come, and only in front of that rock can they summon their own gods into the idols. And there's a shrine either around that rock or next to that rock. And Palenque kings have to talk to this god, have to embrace this god, basically, in order to rule the land. And that's what a Chen is. These are modern Maya Chens, and they're often rock shelters, outcrops around on the periphery of the settlement. hunters go to these places when they want to make sure they could catch deer, and they leave antlers and other body parts of deer, usually at the entrance of these mountaintop shrines. So these are 10. In the great epic of Popol Vuh, the text mentions that the gods were found in the ravines, in the bromeliads, in the forest. These natural immanent forces which are still there. And so CDS-10 is a place where these forces are brought under control, negotiated, domesticated, placed in temples. But even in the city, there's always something like that Hushbolonchak that's still out there, right, on the periphery. That has to be controlled and summoned and negotiated with. When my inscriptions show landscapes, sometimes they use bands. So this is somebody standing at Yasha, the ancient city of Yasha. In this case, Yashtik Uk Yasha, the green-blue as the feathers of Quetzal, the green-blue lake in the sky, in the earth. And sometimes they literally show the king in the mouth of the earth deity that they worship at Yasha, the giant iguana crocodile, mother goddess. And so when the king is like that, he's literally in the sky in the cave. He's in the realm of the gods, while still at Yasha. Now, this is just a generic reference to Kab. And it's interesting, the term Kab, it does not refer to agricultural land, even though it depicts germination. The term for agricultural land is loom. So you go to colonial documents about people partitioning land, partitioning fields, and it's all loom and kash, agricultural land and forest. Kab is more of a control and political and social connotations of land. So kabak means to order, to command, in the same way as you plot your domain, your property. So Maya kings, they never do things directly. They kabak things in the same way as a landowner sets the plot. Maybe plot is even better translation than command. They plot things. They arrange things. So Maya kings, they don't stand on agricultural land. They stand on everything that is theirs, on their domain. And that's perhaps another term that is relevant. And of course, you can translate as town, city, community. You have Chen, which is the sacred center, Mayan ocean of urbanism. And then you have Kab that is around it. And then you have Chan, the realm of the gods and ancestors. So these bands, you can see sometimes, they often include the sign for earth. So sometimes shiny earth. This is an actual place name, hot water, hot springs. There's actual hot springs. So the city is called Hot Springs Place in Hanau. And it's still terrestrial because it's mostly on land. The city of Yashalan, on the other hand, is a peninsular. So it's actually surrounded by water. And they would say Tanha, in the midst of waters, when they talk about it. These are different water events. This is just generic pool of water, Nab, the place where Chak is born from. And this is a place of white shells at the edge of the ocean, Tikaknap. Very beautiful. And it's also the place of five flowers and reeds. Place of 5 flowers and reeds at the edge of the ocean, the place of white shells. So a mythical location, but you can easily imagine a beach like that, with like little reeds and flowers and sand and white shells. And that's at Palenque. This is an actual temple that recreates the place. But you can easily imagine Palenque kings traveling to the oceans not that far and doing some rituals there as well. This is the roof of a shrine. And I'll talk a little bit about that at some point. But Maya temples sometimes are transpositions. They're recreations of place. This entire building is like ocean. It's decorated like the stream of flowing water with little crocodiles and turtles. So you enter into it and you like transport it, teleport it into an ocean. Now, how are people connected to places, these kinds of landscapes? Well, there are still emblem glyphs, Lord of the place, so-and-so. And since most of the Maya scriptures are written by the lords and for the lords, that's the most common way people are connected to a place. But you can also say ach with a place name, like he, she, of a place so-and-so. And that's when you don't want to say that someone is a lord, you don't know, or you don't agree that someone is a lord. And then occasionally there'll be other kinds of connection to a place, because you can be, say, a ball player from a place so-and-so, a wizard, a sorcerer from a place so-and-so, or a priest from a place so-and-so, a warrior from a place so-and-so. Unfortunately, these kinds of references are less common because of the rhetorical orientation of most Maya inscriptions. Most of the statements would be either Lord or generic. So this is Lord of Petun. No holy lords of Petun. Petun is a tiny site of Lamar, usually vassals of more powerful kings. They don't dare to claim the title holy. It's not that important. And people who serve the lords of Petun are just Ah Petun. People from the Pe Rock. We don't know what Pe Rock is. Now, titles like Holy Kanu Lords. Now, Petun lords are actually from Petun. There is a place called Petun. It's the archaeological site of Lamar. But some of the larger, more powerful dynasties who have longer histories, sometimes the name that is in the main royal title is not necessarily the name where they're currently based. So Matwil lords are not based at Matwil. It's a place name from 3,000 years ago. Probably not a real place, although you never know. Kanu lords moved several times. And usually additional titles may be added to sort of clarify the relationship to a place. When there's someone really important, like founder of the dynasty, with a story, then titles which include places may reflect different parts of that story. So you have the founder of the Copan dynasty, Knichashkukmo, born probably around Karakol, who served in the Teotihuacan military for many years, as pretty much indicated in the nature of all the fractures that he survived through his lifetime. The fellow was buried when he died in his 70s. He had a blow to his head, broken clavicles, rib fracture, suggesting that somebody tried to kill him by, stabbing him with something. And it's amazing, he was so physically fit that apparently he still retained some mobility to his arm, and the muscle don't show dystrophy where you would expect when your bone never healed properly. So this was an incredibly physically fit fella, sort of like Scorpion King, who spent most of his life basically going after people trying to kill them, or they tried to kill him in return. And then at age 50-something, he decided to retire. And he went to see Teotihuacan Emperor and said, can I get a kingdom of my own? And the fellow said, yeah, sure, just go to Honduras. We need to secure jade routes and cacao trees. Yeah, and so he had this nice retirement. Basically, he started a kingdom, a way to retire. And so the kingdom of Copan was born. So in retrospective accounts, as you can imagine, he's connected to a lot of places. They call him Lord of Ushvica. That's where he was from the city of Krakow. It's interesting that he was not from the royal family. So even though they call him Lord, they never actually call him by the surname of Krakow kings, which was Kantumak. And we don't know what Kantu is, some kind of ethnic name, but Mak means people, just a very archaic term for people. So they were Kantu people, holy Kantu people. This fellow was not. He was just Ushvica Lord. Now, Karakol rulers sometimes call themselves Ushvica Lords, but it's not the way they see themselves. It's more like descriptive. Yes, they rule over Ushvica, but it's not who they are. But he is just Ushvica Lord, and sometimes Ushvica Ahom, the priest of Ushvica. And that, of course, implies that he grew up in the upper social classes. He was like not nobody. He knew things. He had priestly training of some sort. So you can easily imagine that he would have been like a collateral relative of some sort, who had certain access, but obviously had no chance of becoming someone really significant at Karakol. So when all these Teotihuacan invasion stuff happened, he took advantage of it and rose through the ranks, presumably. When he decided to retire as a king, he went to Teotihuacan, to the great temple of Wintina. And that's why he is the one of Wintina. He went there. In some late narratives, they decided that that wasn't enough. So they started calling him the priest of Wintina. Like he went there and he learned some special sacred knowledge, which obviously qualified him immediately for becoming a king. And then they also start calling him Lord of Wintina, not the divine lord of Quintana, at least there is some modesty there. And by that time, Teotihuacan was long gone, so there was like no harm, right? No risk in saying anything. So he's the Holy King of Copan, the Lord of Quintana. So all of these things, they don't necessarily mean that he was in charge at Quintana, right? Or he was in charge at Copan, but they describe how his royalty came to be. And you have to be very careful when you interpret these titles. This is an example from my own experience, published in article 2007, and I thought that this was a statement that clarified the relationship between family membership, Kanu Lord, and the current location, Inustetun. It turns out I was wrong. So the latest interpretation as of 4 days ago is Snaky Lord. And the problem, the spelling itself is not suggestive. Kanul, Kanla can be either a place name, a place of many snakes, with a long vowel, Kanul. And we see it occasionally when it's spelled syllabically as Kanula and not Kanala. But this particular guy is not. He's Kanalahau, literally snaky person. And that was his name. A colleague of mine actually found an example when you can see Kanalahau and then Kuhul Kanulahau. So snaky lord, the holy lord of Kanul. Here, he just goes by his snaky lord name. Like he was a very, very, very snake-like person. And then instead of Inustetun, someone actually noticed that some early photos of that text contain an extra stroke to the side and 2 more strokes on top. And that means it's actually conflated with the syllable yi. So instead of Inustetun, it's Yita Ustetun, accompanied by Ustetun person. So the significance has changed substantially. But that's what happens sometimes when people study things, they discover new things. It's actually a good thing that research is still possible. So you have to understand what people mean, when they mean it, what it all implies about the way Maya societies worked. This particular fellow dedicated his own monument. His name was Sakteles, White Jesus Lizard. Have you heard about Jesus Lizard? Can run on water. So he's White Jesus Lizard, and he's a Sahal. He's a provincial nobleman, also Anab, like a craftsman, and Chahom, a priest. And he's from Tkalnak, the place of mud houses. And that lintel was looted from a temple on that island. And then looters accused each other of looting it, but one of them did it. And this is something commissioned by his son. His son somehow became the king, presumably by marrying a princess. That's usually the way it is done. And it is likely because we know that the maternal grandfather of his 3 sons from the first wife was indeed of royalty. So to have a maternal grandfather, they had to have a royal mother. And that's presumably how the White Jesus Lizard became connected to royalty. He presumably rebelled against his overlord, and then eventually settled for a princess as a kind of way of making peace with the royal family. But his son faced a dilemma. His son had to marry a second wife, imposed upon him by the more powerful king of Yeshchuan. And of course, the king of Yeshchuan expected to have a heir from his daughter, and his newly embraced vassal at the side of Bonaparte, Osihuitz. And so retrospectively, the nature of White Jesus Lizard's status changes. So now our little Sakteles becomes the person of Bonaparte. So he moved to the nearby town where at that time the court was established. It was very important to say that he was already there. And of course, we don't know. Maybe after he married the princess, they both moved there. It's possible. But then he also becomes lord of the place of the clay houses, even though he wasn't. And then the holy Lord, another royal connection, which he also didn't have. So this is one of the few examples when we clearly see they make things up. But we understand the dilemma that Yahochan Moan, his son, was facing. He had 2 wives. The first wife marked an internal peace with all the noble houses of his kingdom. That marriage basically stopped the civil war. And he had 3 kids from that marriage, all proper royal princes, all basically reaching adulthood, all very successful in everything, But then she had a second wife and she had a son. And so that's when they paint these beautiful palettes with Yashchalan money, of course, showing how everyone is happy with the arrangement. And they never even finished painting the murals when the kingdom imploded, and then someone picked everyone's eyes off, suggesting that not everyone was happy. Suggests there were some red lines you just couldn't cross. You could not retroactively promote your dad to kingship and then basically try to dispossess the three princes who were the only royalty in that generation, and then give it to someone who was born from a foreign princess and the son of a commoner. Now, what else do we know about Maya landscapes? Of course, we keep talking Maya, but what did Mayas themselves think in terms of like how far the world stretched, of the world of the Maya stretched? There is a word "tul" that means foreigner. It's not very commonly used in Maya inscriptions. So someone who lived here captured a foreign captive at some point, suggesting that, yeah, you're here at the very edge of the Maya world. You're dealing with people who don't speak your language. That seems to be the main designation of tuls. And then somewhere in this area, there is a monument that describes the foreign invasion in the 750s of the 8th century, mentioning foreign overlord, Tul Kalomte. Those statements are rare because that implies that you really don't understand these people. For example, when Mayas interacted with Teotihuacan, they never called Teotihuacanos foreigners. We know there were embassies at Teotihuacan. There was a Maya neighborhood in Teotihuacan. So these people were not considered to be foreigners. They're more like imperial capital. Kind of understand the difference. Imperial capital is not foreigners. They're just people who are richer and better than you. But there are distant places. And what is also interesting, you have these Maya titles. I forgot to mention that. So sometimes people say, I live in the north. That implies you're part of something that has a north. Or like, I'm in the west. Or I'm in the south. So that kind of gives us a sense of where Maya people saw themselves. And then occasionally they would give you a list of like the 4 greatest kings did this, or the 4 greatest kings did that. And that also tells you a little bit about what the Mayas themselves thought about the extent of the realm of people they shared their culture with. And you can see some of these lists are kind of showing a larger area. Towards the end of the classic period, you see it's contracting and contracting and contracting, suggesting that things were really breaking down. So people no longer thought of a place, a few hundred miles away as part of their world. They no longer thought about it. They no longer consider it. It was no longer part of their mental maps. So it's also very interesting, suggesting that the notion of what the world of the classic Maya was kept changing, and obviously was not the same depending on where you were in that world. So that would probably be the core area. You see like the highest level of overlap between these different lists. Migration is a big theme in Mesoamerica in general, not just in the Maya area. People describe how they came usually from a cave of some sort, and then they traveled, and then they conquered all these places, and they usually say, and that totally justifies the fact that we have what we have, we live where we live. This is, of course, a typical Aztec presentation of the emergence of the 7 tribes from Aztlan. This is what Maya described, this oceanic place of Matuil, where the kings originated, and of the Palenque dynasty specifically, and made their pact with the gods. This is the ancient place of Ka, mentioned at the site of Tonina. At the nearby site of Piedras Negras, they describe how they went to the 5-Flower Mountain. These are also very important stories. So you have this Maya world, but presumably out there, there's places of significance, which give you authority and power, and you describe how you're different from everybody else in this area through these stories of travel. So different Vikings, for example, went to the west, to Teotihuacan. So these are all references to the families, by the families who had some connection to Teotihuacan. They went, they saw. Some places went to another location known the Metate of Maguey, and that may have been located here. So a different kind of important narrative related to migration. So Teotihuacan is here, and Maya lands is there, and yet it's very important because Teotihuacanos come at some point in the 4th century, conquer everyone. It's the great city, it's enormous, It becomes part of the mythology, of the narratives of power in the Maya area. So this is the king of Copan. It took him 153 days to travel from Teotihuacan to the hometown of Copan. He brought a wheel, he brought authority with him. There used to be murals showing that in his palace, which is very interesting, but now we only have fragments. So we see footprints suggesting those depictions of travels. This is a mural from the site of Sufrikai where I work, and it actually shows one of these trips, presumably between one city and the other city, of course shown as temples. That's the Mesoamerican way of showing places. So you have to see different gods. This one looks like a wheel, and people traveling along the road. Very much like, say, Charlemagne the Great would travel to Rome and be declared emperor. The king of Piedras Negras went to Teotihuacan, and he brought crowns of authority with him, and he gave each vassal a crown. So you see them all wearing these helmets called how. We know the king of Copan actually brought one from Teotihuacan, or at least made one in this likeness because it was found in the burial. Other kings traveled to other places. This is the story of the king of Canquen. He went to the great city of Calakmul, the seat of the Kanul power that at the time was the most powerful royal family. And there, in the presence of the local gods, he was declared king. But it's interesting that then he traveled for 102 days to a mountain called Makanwit. And that mountain must have been really far away because from that mountain he traveled back to the city of Canquen in southern Petén. And it took him 157 days. A really long trip. And only then he returned to Canquen, to the beautiful, shiny, watery place, Halum, the island of turtles, the island in the heart of the turtle. The 3 turtle islands. Apparently a lot of turtles in Canquen. So this is a kind of pilgrimage. It's interesting, one of his descendants just went to the nearby city of Piedras Negras, Dos Pilas, held some kind of palanque and returned in 4 days. That's this text. So apparently different standards of how far you need to travel to be declared ruler. The cave of Nachtunich is another famous pilgrimage center in the Maya area. And that's probably the closest we get to this notion of pilgrimage that you can find in the Christian literature, like traveling to a holy land, traveling to a place that transforms you, that makes you a different person, finding communion with people on a similar trip. So this is where the cave of Nachtunich is. It is truly spectacular cave. This is, the main entrance. It's enormous, and it's filled with little shrines and offerings accumulated over the years. And the walls of the cave in certain places are covered in ancient Maya dipinti or graffiti left by pilgrims. It's interesting. The time frame is relatively narrow when people actually were living these graffiti for about 50 years. When I guess it was popular as a center of pilgrimage. Perhaps it was associated with a particularly charismatic oracle or priest of some sort who made it very, very popular. And then, presumably, individuals went on to different caves, different cults. So these pilgrims, they live texts. They describe how they came to the Black Cave. Apparently, that's how it was called. And how they walked around the edge of the cave. So the idea was it wasn't enough to just come. You had to walk through the cave. And there are images of processions among the graffiti. Sometimes people would go up, and sometimes people would go down. And some of these graffiti actually left in various places like vertical shafts, suggesting very arduous movement. You were supposed to see something. A lot of pilgrims in different parts of the cave mentioned that they saw Monpan. We still don't know what Monpan is. Of course, there are Mopan Maya today. There's a Mopan River that starts not so far from the cave, and that may be related, but it was some kind of entity. But it was part of the spirit of the cave, whether it was an oracle that was speaking, we don't know. But they all came to see Monpan. This person saw the road, saw the dream, or the Wahi demon, suggesting that it was really some kind of transformative experience, right? You came there looking for a way, like your life. and you could find it, apparently. This person saw the carved cave, presumably because of the carvings and images in the cave. So seeing was very important for these pilgrims. They thought that the cave represented the black cave or the black hole, a supernatural place, like entrance to the underworld. Very much like to the Greeks, certain locations were mythologically connected to the entrance to the underworld. So this cave apparently was to the Maya. So they went to see it, or to see the edge of it, as in here they say, teach them, edge of the cave. So they thought that the cave kept going, right? They just wouldn't go there. So they literally connected it to their mythology. There were professionals working at the cave, prophets, right? So the inscriptions mention nearby royal family who had their prophets, who apparently assisted the pilgrims. Chichwinik, literally, you can translate it as a prophet or as a motivational speaker. This person is Uba, this is his image, the reverent guide, the one who tells the road, mom, grandpa, and whatever he's doing apparently is important for spiritual guidance. And it's the omen for the youth, umuk chok. Unfortunately, the verb is not very clear. It's right there, whatever he is doing. But it's the omen for the youth. That's some kind of holy man, right? All naked, with his hair garbled, doing some bloodletting or who knows what. The different interpretations. But that's what you had inside that cave, apparently. A holy man, a prophet. And a lot of visitors were young people. So just approached in adulthood. For them, it was, I guess, part of becoming an adult, sort of like a grand tour of some sort, like an experience that transforms you into a full adult. And I guess, and well, what happens in the cave stays in the cave, basically. A lot of these graffitis are strange. So that is very, very close to our concept of pilgrimage, right? You go into a place of spiritual elevation, transformation, seeing the road, being helped by certain ritual specialists. This is the only reference to prophets in the entire corpus of Mayhaviv inscriptions. And amongst these inscriptions, at Nakhtunch, we at least have 3 references to that prophet. He must have been very important. And when we look at the network of pilgrims, you can see it kind of forms an arch, and it's mostly vassals of the Kano royal family who traveled from pretty far away. On the other hand, some places close to the cave never send their pilgrims. It's very interesting. Just like pilgrims today, it's all about religion, certain cult, certain network. Presumably other places are popular amongst other Maya cities. They don't go there. They don't go to Nakhtunich. So there is a social aspect to it. What we see is the cave and its pilgrimage are also part of a flow of people and information, and extends presumably further south to the great city of Kopan and the trade in cacao and jade. So the Persian, for example, from El Palmar visited Nakhtunich, and pilgrims from El Palmar visited Kopan. We know it because they left inscriptions about it. So that was all part of the same kind of travel. Now, at Homul, at Naranjo, the places where I work, nobody went to Nakhtunich. So very interesting. Their landscape is a bit different. Their landscape is looking inwards. So it's a kind of different approach. Instead of saying, we went there and that's why we're powerful. People in this part of the Maya world, they claim, we're powerful because we're locals. We have been there forever. So the site of Homul, if you ever travel to Homul, work in one of my projects, you will discover that a lot of early buildings are actually places. They're decorated with images of gods. So the city itself was like a replication of the landscape around it. It's very interesting. So you have the place of the ancestors, the place of the hummingbird god, the place of the royal headband, the celestial bird, and the celestial king of gods, the 2 alter egos. They're, of course, part of the same compound. The nearby city of Naranjo, we don't have these beautiful masks from early architecture. They haven't been excavated yet, or archaeologists were not perhaps as lucky. But we have a lot of place names from Naranjo, and these are Masham, Saal, the part of the Emblem glyph, the main title of Naranjo kings. And it's actually 6 black something had been placed, the flat hilltop, the Sal. So this is here. We have many references to it. And then this large palace was called the Five Sky House, a mythological mountain of certain gods. And there are other locations elsewhere. What is interesting, though, that these place names, Masham and Sa'al, they're ancient. So according to this altar, Masham was occupied 17,000 years ago. They're arguing that their kings essentially never left from before the current creation. So instead of saying our authority comes because we traveled to Teotihuacan or to a distant mountain, or we came from a place beyond the sea, Naranjo, they're basically like indigenous. They're about their locality, the fact that they are the original settlers of this land. Like, you can't move us away. We have been here forever. In fact, in some of the later inscriptions, they upgrade the antiquity of their dynasty to 700,000 years. Because, yeah, I mean, if you do 17, it doesn't really matter. From 17 to 700, it's just basically more of a symbolic move. And this is the main shrine, the Sinai, and it really sits on top of some of the oldest architecture of the city. In fact, the original shrine was carved into bedrock, very much like a chen, living rock, and then built over later and later construction phases. And there are many references to this place. That's where Naranjo kings declared themselves kings. That's where they sacrificed their captives. That's where they essentially made a pact with their primary deity in Saal. The main palace is here. This is Saal. This plaza is probably Masham, and this is the main palace of Naranjo kings. And the palace is pretty impressive too. A part of the 6th and 7th century section of that palace was excavated using tunneling. For some reason, Maya didn't demolish it when they wanted to rebuild the palace. They just buried it whole. That was probably related to the fact that it was occupied by a king who really reigned for a long, long time. So when he passed away, age 80 plus, nobody wanted to move into these buildings, and they were quite shabby by that, of course, by that time, of course. But nobody felt like demolishing them. That would be a problematic symbolic act. So they just buried the whole thing to the rooftops, very respectfully. And so we have whole facades of buildings, relatively well preserved. And the amazing part is every building in a palace has a different decoration. It's essentially a different place. So the palace is a kind of landscape. You move from room to room, and there is this ocean room, and then there's a room of the place of monkey scribes. That's the royal title of Naranjo, the monkey scribes of the north, Sakchuen. And then there is a place of a seed mountain where the patron god, one of the major patron gods of Naranjo, the hummingbird god, lives. And nearby is the shining mountain. So every structure in the palace is essentially a transposition, a projection of a landscape. And at first I thought that that was just all mythology. So the recreation of a mythical landscape, all these mountains and oceans. And this is the seed mountain, and you can see the hummingbird god perched on top of the mountains on the facade of the building, and there are graffiti on the inside suggesting that this room was indeed occupied by a priest, he of the god. And there are scribbles. He did some calendar on the walls, wrote something about a deer sacrifice he got once, and so very obviously a ritual a location. But this place is not just a mythical place. A recent inscription from the area of Naranjo on a vase describing military campaign mentions it as a real location. So this temple is not a representation of a mythical place where that god lived many years ago. There's actually a mountain somewhere in this landscape around Naranjo where that god lives. And this room inside the palace is a representation of that mountain, so that the king could visit upon the mountain without leaving the palace. A very interesting approach. So the king, by moving from room to the room to the room, is actually visiting the bigger realm. The palace is a projection of the sacred landscape of the realm of Naranjo, of all these gods. So it's a real place. And it's not, and these are just images of the hummingbird god. And you can see that here he is depicted next to the word for Sal, the place name for Naranjo. So there used to be apparently drinking cups with different patron gods. So like a collection, patron gods of the Maya cities or something along those lines. And this one is the hummingbird god of Naranjo. You can see that he's a hummingbird because he has a beak with a flower. And there are just different images of that god from different ceramic fossils. Apparently, if you visited Naranjo at that time, that's the kind of souvenir you would get. The cup with the god of Naranjo. It's like, welcome to Naranjo, this is our god. And of course, if you touch it, you're part of it now, right? Because it's not just an image. Part of the god is in it. But other place names around Naranjo, they're also ancient sort of godly places. This is Balam Hole, Jaguar Hill, or Jaguar Head. And this is a vase from the same time as these hummingbird gods that shows the celestial king of gods living in Balam Hole, like perched on top of that place name. And Balam Hole is the site of Huitzna to the north of Naranjo that Naranjo burnt at some point to the ground. But it suggests that the hilltop that overlooks Huitzna, we know it's a tall hill and has a temple on top of it. That's what it was. So it was just another place where ancient gods lived. There is a site called Quinchila. Unfortunately, we never matched it to a real archaeological site yet. But we know that that's the place where the terrestrial counterpart of the king of gods lived, the Itzamat, the one who was, naked, defeated by the bunny. I told you that story. This is the reference. This is how they depict that place. It's dark, under the stars. There's a god in his mountain dwelling. But it's also a real city. So Naranjo is surrounded by these ancient place names. Each one claims, we are indigenous. This is our mountain. We've been at that mountain forever. So it's a very sharp contrast to this idea of migration. You have these people who say, well, we just came from here, therefore we are lords. Naranjo people say, we've been here forever, that's why we are lords. And you are all basically immigrants. So, and these models, they coexist at the same time. Right? You have people who are emphasizing their authority because they are the most indigenous of all. You have people who emphasize their authority because they're foreign. And they somehow interact with each other. We all call them Maya, and they have this notion of shared identity, but they probably don't think of each other as the same. So that's all, right? So I hope I was able to introduce some of these, complex concepts of how people relate to place, but also what kinds of places you have in the Maya world. Any questions? I went through a lot of slides, I know. Anything about Maya places that you wanted to know? You'd be surprised, I still don't know the ancient place name of Forholmol. It's kind of amazing, there's the site, I worked there, but we still don't know the place. It's not mentioned elsewhere. They're not interested in mentioning it anywhere in the text. There may be one place, and the latest wild guess is that's actually mentioned at Tikal as the place where Tikal king fled to before he was murdered by Teotihuacano invading army. Chaquel. That would be really weird. Like, why Holmo of all places? Maybe because it's far. But even then, if that's true, that'll be the only outside reference. Like, nobody cares. But the region itself is known as lands, and sometimes it's 5 lands, sometimes it's 6 lands, and sometimes it's 7 lands. You kind of wonder what is going on with these people, right? So like do they like exclude some communities from the group? Like, you're no longer one of us. We're 6 lands now, not 7. And then, the list keeps getting shorter. Now you have 5 lands. Yeah, maybe they burn some people down. But the interesting part here is that these local identities, they're very, very, very strong. And that's the last point perhaps worth mentioning. The city of Huitzna was burned by Naranjo. We know it from the archaeological and environmental record. They burned the whole hill down. And we know the fire was north because the lift took large chunks of charcoal and deposited them in the nearby lake. The city was completely depopulated. People were not killed on the spot. There are no skeletons in the ruins. They were probably forcibly resettled. And of course, when I say the city was burnt, it means everything was burnt. All the fields, all the orchards, everything that the people invested their lifetimes into cultivating was completely destroyed. And for about 30, 40 years, there was nobody there. We see evidence of like small slash and burn agriculture, suggesting there's some opportunistic farmers. But the level of erosion drops. So we know there's nobody's intensively farming that hill anymore. But then the perpetrator Naranjo suffers a defeat from Tikal. And at that point, people return and rebuild Huitzna. They return, they rebuild. And that happened 50 years after the fact. They rebuild, their kings come back. And that implies that wherever they used to be in exile for 50 years, they retained their community identity, they retained their faith, and they retained their family, their royal family, which were part of the community. And that suggests an incredible level of like social cohesion, right? You're defeated, you're destroyed. Why don't you just abandon these kings, these losers, in the first place? But that's not what happened. And that means that this connection to the landscape, to these ancient places, must have been very strong, and that's what kind of formed part of local identities, made people essentially invest in a particular community because they thought of it not necessarily just personal relationship with the king, but part of this bigger relationship with the place, with the land, with its gods, and with the king.